Welcome back. Government says it has reached 1.51 trillion in investment target pledges, over achieving the set targets by 26%. Various companies from different industries pledged new investments at the 5th South African Investment Conference held at the Sandton Convention Centre today. The local and international investors are expected to help grow local businesses and create more jobs.
Government had initially set a target of 1.2 trillion rand. President Cyril Ramaphosa says the target achieved today has enabled government to increase the value of the pledges by 301 billion rand. The mining sector, energy, construction and roads, chemical health sector, as well as property and logistics are just some of the sectors that have pledged billions of rands to invest in the South African economy this morning. President Cyril Ramaphosa says South Africa is an investment destination with significant untapped potential.
For us to have been able to meet our 5-year target despite the major challenges and disruptions is no mean feat. It is a stellar achievement. We should all be very proud of having achieved this, and I think we deserve to give ourselves a big round of applause for that.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says the investment commitment made to date have already resulted in substantial investment in the productive economy of our country, and that almost 70% of the projects announced in 2018 are either completed or on their way to completion. He says that today's commitments cover 21 district municipalities across the country, and that 263 billion rand is spent in infrastructure development in the last 4 years.
When we talk about investment in the cause of development, infrastructure is at the center of that. Infrastructure development meets pressing community needs and often leaves behind a legacy for future generations. By way of example, a few years ago, Sanral stood on this platform and announced at this investment conference their plans to build the Msikaba Bridge, the longest and highest cable-stayed suspension bridge in Africa. On a superficial level, this bridge connects peoples and the economies of the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal.
Government has a huge task of appeasing investors to invest in South Africa amid the energy crisis that has seen the country being plunged into stage 6 load shedding, and is committed to providing sufficient capacity for the electricity grid. Naledi Matlapeng, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And now to unpack this further, we are now joined on the line by Phellisa Nkomo from the Commission for Gender Equality. Of course, unpacking the 5th and final leg of the first administration for President Cyril Ramaphosa. One would say, Phellisa, when you go into the targets which were set by President Cyril Ramaphosa and the successes which he has now tabled, what does this mean for South Africa?
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you very much. I mean, one of the key things, of course, we need to honor the president for is that he's really been true to his word in as far as the investment conference, because this was his first announcement that he made when he took office. That's the first issue. But also the second thing is that I think with the type of crisis we confronted with South Africa around poverty, unemployment, and social inequality, quantitative numbers may not mean a lot, because we must be able to deconstruct or distill very deeply and ask ourselves, what are these numbers talking to us? So in different years, for example, last year, the president in the investment conference, he had managed to secure about 267 billion. In other years, it was 400, etc. So, but qualitatively, how does that contribute into not only the big growth, but also fundamentally in job creation, but also in reviving economic sectors that are actually currently struggling. And we are not able at this moment to qualitatively say that what has been the impact of some of these investments. So that's a third issue. I think that's the fourth issue for me, of course, coming from a Commission for Gender Equality. Among the key things that we're really looking for is a gendered approach in relation to investment. A gendered approach that really looks at and saying, so with all the policy regimes we have, from black economic empowerment that looks at women's participation, etc., how do we make sure that the investments that have actually been planted into the country gets to benefit women? And I think we need to move away from the quantitative targeting into qualitative targeting. I hear, for example, the clip that we're playing now, about the bridge, etc., etc. I mean, it's true that the bridge is actually going to improve the quality of life of other people who are in there. But what's really happening is that we must then talk about what are the multiplier effects? What are the multiplier effects? What are the multiplier effects that are associated with ensuring that all these bridges get built? Because the reality is that bridges, when President makes an announcement around the investment conference, he must be able to say, part of the spending, let's say 20% is going to young people. Young people of this country are languishing in poverty. 66% of them are unemployed. Black women, 42% live, economically unproductive lives. So in essence, I think for me, when you start breaking in detail the benefits that are associated with this investment conference, we must really talk about the qualitative benefits. I think we over the number of things. Now, even the last point that I want to make, as I talk to you now, I was meant to be live with SABC. I'm taking this call in the dark. There's no electricity, right? Communities have to really start spending for themselves and look at alternative sources of energy. Now, one of the key issues we know in investment is that access to energy is the backbone for building vibrant economies. Without energy, you're not going to be able to do that. Now, let alone the fact that the energy crisis is actually destroying mainstream economy in as far as industry, whom some of them can afford the other alternative sources. But what about households in South Africa who cannot afford to buy solar, let alone the small, medium enterprises? But there's a bigger issue here that was not even began to deal with it. It's the impact on the national psyche, right, and self-esteem of South Africans. Remember, we are a nation that has really been reeling and recovering from racial exclusion and economic exclusion over the years. So now, if, for instance, right now, amongst the key things that we're going to do is to actually perpetually subject the very country and the very citizens into this type of deprivation in terms of some components of human rights, because electricity is actually a human rights service, because it facilitates household lives, it facilitates community lives, it facilitates business, it facilitates the broader economy. So in essence, we must really think about what are the implications of this dysfunctionality, going forward, because there is actually a correlation between the state of the economy, access to opportunities for individuals, and even some of these announcements. I mean, one of the key things that the president has really been talking about recently is around the issue of social compact and how, private sector needs to commit into social compact. And in fact, I think part of this conference is really delivering on that social compact. But, I mean, for me, I think the talk show is over. I mean, communities are imploding. Women who run businesses have no support system, right? There's no access to finance. So, for instance, the president announced in the State of the Nation address that he is going to be allocating 1.4 billion towards small enterprises.
And
now,
Ms. Nkomo, it also brings me to another question that you've also pointed out. You've pointed out that the country continues to struggle with a number of problems. We have a struggling economy, a high unemployment rate. You've also pointed out to the issue of load shedding. Going forward, Ramaphosa has also now said that over the next 5 years, the new target will be 2 trillion rand. How is this possible? And, when it comes to, the major challenges we continue to face, and primary just being load shedding.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, that's an issue. That's why I'm actually saying that. I think we need to look at the qualitative components of this investment. And I think targets are correct. For instance, amongst the key things that we discovered as heterodox economists, I think 2 years ago, was that some of the commitments that were made in the investment conference were actually investments that were made pre-COVID. But all the companies did, they just re-announced those. But also, I do think that private sector also needs to be upfront with the president and actually tell him and say, while we make these commitments, as long as electricity management in this country is unclear, as long as macroeconomic policy is unclear, but also even if government comes into the party, government must also start and say, with the investments that you are actually announcing, amongst the key things we're targeting, we want young people to start to work. Now, one of the things we have been calling for is that convert this country into a construction site and just really get access to increase access into income for families who are really struggling. So, and the issue that I think this investment conference is meant to do that. And I think at first value, when you look at the numbers, it's really meant to do that. But, we read the data. I've been commenting almost every quarter at SAPC about the data of unemployment. And if you look at the data of unemployment, in fact, the only sector that has been consistent in creating jobs has been the public sector, which is either community project or it's public sector project.
All right, then. Thank you very much. Of course, then that is Peli Sankomo there giving us her insight in terms of the investment conference that is also then wrapping up for this administration. But we know that it will then still continue with the new targets now being set by President Cyril Ramaphosa for the next 5 years, being that 2 trillion rand over 5 years.